The cold shoulder for a Cold War treaty. Russia follows the U.S. by pulling out of the Open Skies Agreement covering military surveillance flights. Will this make the world more dangerous? And is the pact still relevant today? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. One of the cornerstones of global security since the Cold War is in danger of collapsing. The Open Skies Treaty allows countries to fly aircraft over each other's territories to monitor military activity. But the two superpowers that established that pact no longer want to be part of it. The U.S. completed its withdrawal in November after serving out 6 months' notice. Russia says it'll do the same, arguing the remaining 34 signatories have made little progress on cooperation. Washington and Moscow have accused each other of violating the treaty. The announcement leaves the so-called New START as the only arms control pact between Russia and the U.S. That treaty limits numbers of nuclear warheads, but expires next month. So what is the Open Skies Treaty? In 1955, U.S. President Dwight Eisenhower suggested Washington and the Soviet Union allow surveillance flights over each other's territories. Moscow rejected it at the time. Decades later, in 1989, George H.W. Bush expanded the concept to include NATO members and other European countries. The pact allows unarmed monitoring flights to collect data on military activities. The agreement was signed in 1992 and went into effect 10 years later. With the withdrawal of the U.S. and Russia, only European nations, Turkey and Canada, remain in the treaty. The pact doesn't include military powers like China that have flourished since the Cold War. And critics say the planes used for Open Skies flights are outdated, especially when countries can conduct surveillance with smaller and more advanced drones. All right, let's bring in our guests. In Moscow, Pavel Felgenhauer, a Russian defense and military analyst. In Brussels, Teresa Fallon, director of the Center for Russia-Europe-Asia Studies. And in Istanbul, Matthew Bryza, former director for Europe and Eurasia at the National Security Council and a former U.S. diplomat. Welcome to the program. Teresa, let me start with you. What happens now? I mean, it's a 6-month process until Russia is fully withdrawn from the Open Skies Treaty, correct?
That's correct. So this could be a kind of a soft opening for the Biden administration. And it's really unclear right now what will happen because we know that the START treaty expires in February. So this Open Skies agreement is seen as at the beginning of the whole negotiation for START. It's considered a smaller agreement. As you mentioned in your program, the issue of technology has changed. We can look at Google Maps and see some of these things, even though some of the planes would have more sensitive data collection. So the issue on both sides of the aisle were that for example, Russia wasn't allowing flights over Kaliningrad. And so we see even the personalization of this. President Trump was very upset with a Russian plane flying over his golf course in Bedminster. So this might be a dated agreement, but it actually was important for building up faith in each other's sides. And as Eisenhower, as you pointed out, wanted to make this type of agreement to kind of a confidence building measure. But technology has changed very dramatically. So the fact that Donald Trump has pulled out of 3 of these types of agreements is a bit worrisome. The Biden administration coming into power in just a couple of days has made it clear to allies and partners that it wants to work with them. And so will he be able to nurture a better relationship, even though in light of the recent hacking attack on the United States? So it remains to be seen. The world has changed since this was first put on the table. And the other issue is global governance issues. Trump made it clear that he wanted China to be involved in the START agreement. So Russia and China. And since China has made it absolutely clear they don't want to be part of it. So we have to work together with Russia and China on new global governance issues. I think this is the key for the new Biden administration.
Pavel, is there any chance that Russia would be willing to rejoin the Open Skies Treaty? And what would have to happen in order for that to occur?
Well, right now it seems that the Kremlin has definitely decide to withdraw. Of course, that will take some time. The 6 month period has not yet begun. The note has not been sent to the depository nations. That will apparently there's going to be a vote in the Russian Duma, maybe then signed by the president, and after that the note will be sent. So the 6 month countdown will begin most likely in it will take maybe several weeks or something. But Russia is getting out. I believe, and it's some observers here in Moscow believe that this is the direct result of President Trump losing the re-election, and that any hope that he might overturn the election result are also lost. And so Russia decided to move. Russian military and most likely the Kremlin wanted to get out of open skies anyways, but there was especially after the American territory became non-available, but there was a belief that maybe Moscow could work this so that put the American allies who wanted open skies against the Americans who do not, and try to put wedges into the transatlantic relationship. But now, when Biden is definitely coming in, it's obvious that the Europeans and the Americans under Biden will get cozy together, using open skies to put wedges in transatlantic relationship won't work. And then Moscow decided to go out. And so now Moscow is definitely going out. There's talk that maybe if America comes back into the treaty, then Russia would reconsider. But that technically is impossible.
Matthew, let me ask you to expand on what Pavel was saying, because Pavel said that there's talk that perhaps if the U.S. were to come back into the treaty, that maybe Moscow would reconsider. U.S. President-elect Joe Biden has said that he supports the Open Skies Treaty. Is there a possibility now that the U.S. would rejoin? And is there room for negotiation between the U.S. and Russia on perhaps a modified version of the Open Skies Treaty?
Yeah, sure, there is a possibility that the U.S. could return. And President-elect Biden has signaled, as you're just saying, Mohammed, that he is in favor of continued arms control, even beyond open skies. As Teresa was saying, President-elect Biden has said he would like to extend the New START treaty, which is the treaty that limits the numbers of nuclear warheads and delivery systems, so missiles. And that's a position that President Putin has also had, which is he would like to extend the New START treaty maybe 1 year and then possibly going to 5 years. I interpreted this move by Russia as sending a signal to the Biden administration that we're submitting our notification that 6 months from once the note is submitted, as Pavel has said, it hasn't happened yet, we will then leave this treaty. So therefore, unarticulated is, if you'd like to negotiate that nuclear weapons agreement, okay, let's come to the table with a fresh start, if you will, on New START.
Teresa, let me ask you this. You know, there are those who have said that they've questioned, you know, how functional the Open Skies Treaty is right now. You were making mention of that in your previous answer. I mean, what function does a treaty like this serve in today's military landscape? With the Open Skies Treaty, you have specific aircraft fitted with specific cameras. They have to meet requirements. Some say it's all rather outdated at a time when countries have access to newer drones and far better technology and cameras with higher resolution. What do you say?
I think that's a very good question. I mean, the importance of this agreement was kind of a confidence-building measure. And as Pavel pointed out, Putin tried to reach out to the other European member states who really do like the ability to kind of see what's going on in Russia. And Putin tried to reach out and establish an agreement with them that they wouldn't share the information with the United States, and that didn't fly. And so I think that we need to continue to cooperate with Russia or talk to Russia. And the Biden administration has made it clear that diplomacy is very important. But technology has changed. And I think that this type of confidence building measure would be nice to see it continue. But as you pointed out, does this agreement really talk about drones? I don't know the absolute legal ability about that. And some of these things, you can just look at Google Earth and see these things happening on the ground. For example, even in Xinjiang, the concentration camps there were identified on open source information with satellites. So I think that it's part of a larger geopolitical picture right now, this type of agreement and how the US and Russia will work together. And the key issue really is China. And China does not want to be part of this. As you mentioned, it's 1,550 warheads. China has about 300, and they have no desire to join an agreement like this at this point. But I think over the longer term, we really have to consider how to bring China into these global governance issues.
Matthew, I saw you nodding along to some of what Teresa was saying there. I mean, since there is so little regulation when it comes to drones being used for military and surveillance purposes, did Open Skies provide a level playing field for the signatories, or does it provide a level playing field when it comes to sharing of information, when it comes to, granting access to airspace?
Well, I mean, it is a level playing field in terms of the use of aircraft for overflights. And I think there was a totally unregulated use of national technical means or satellites for observing each other's territories, right? That's not part of Open Skies. And the reality is that in the last, since 1992 when it was first signed, and since 2002 when Open Skies first was fully active or implemented, U.S. satellite surveillance technologies have advanced dramatically and a lot faster than Russia's. So to tell you the truth, by maintaining Open Skies, Russia was actually having the opportunity to, I would say, to obtain some information that may not have been able to gather through its national technical means. So, but leaving that aside, to pick up on a point that Teresa was just making on global governance or on more broadly diplomacy, for me, diplomacy is a process. It's not about achieving a bilateral deal or a transaction, as President Trump often looks at it. President Trump famously said when he was talking about leaving Open Skies, well, the Russians are violating it, so if you're not going to stay in an agreement, we're going to leave that agreement. But diplomacy is about creating a network of agreements and understandings that lead to dialogue that is more truthful, more transparent. And in the case of Open Skies, what it did was provide a degree of transparency and therefore confidence on each side that if there were to be severe military tension, that they would at least have a chance to have a channel of communication through this visual imagery to be able to demonstrate that they maybe aren't preparing for military action.
Pavel, in your previous answer, you mentioned the New START Treaty. This, of course, is the new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, which is a nuclear arms control agreement. It's the last major remaining limit on nuclear competition between the U.S. and Russia. It expires on February 5th unless both governments agree to a 5-year extension. Do you believe that Russia will agree to a 5-year extension, and what needs to happen for that agreement to take place?
Well, basically, the Biden administration incoming and the Kremlin say they want an extension. And the treaty provides such a capability. It can be extended one time for 5 years and without ratification. But achieving that would be quite not easy at all, because they'll have just about 2 weeks, 3 weeks. More like 2 weeks. And the problem is that the Biden administration comes in without any of its top cabinet officials approved by the Senate too. To negotiate something so swiftly, I don't know will they manage or not. Because then they don't, then it goes to new treaties, new agreements, and that will require ratification in the American Senate, 2/3, over 67 senators voting, and then the totally split today's American Senate ratifying a treaty with Vladimir Putin is going to be quite a problem. So they'll have to go head over tails to just do that in those 2 weeks coming up. I don't know will they manage or not, because there were different ideas. 1-year extension, 5-year extension with preconditions, with some kind of additional declaration that doesn't need ratification. So they'll have to skid around ratification process to get something done, and it's not clear will that happen or not.
Teresa, if New START isn't extended or replaced, that means that the world's two biggest nuclear powers, the U.S. and Russia, will return to a time where there were no significant restraints on their nuclear arsenals. From your vantage point, how worrying is that?
I find it extremely worrying. And I hope that the Biden administration, I mean, I've seen some discussion that Jake Sullivan, because he doesn't need to be confirmed by the Senate, would actually be in the negotiator's chair on this. And if they could get it for the 1 year or the 5 year and avoid any sort of Senate ratification, that would buy everybody some time, because obviously the Biden administration on day one has a very, very full inbox. And I think it's very important to, get this set better 5 years, but at least the first year, and just to kind of clear the deck a bit. I think it's also in Russia's interest to work with the US on this, because Russia is clearly in a difficult economic position and they have other concerns. So I think that this agreement has served both sides well, and I think both would benefit if they could finally get China in on it. So I think this is something both sides should work together on. I think they would both benefit. But if it doesn't get renewed, we are facing a very uncertain future. And we've also seen, for example, this week, Kim Jong-un announced he has a new submarine nuclear weapon. So we're entering a new nuclear age. This kind of this period of peace is coming to an end if this isn't renewed. And so I do hope very much so that the Biden administration has made this a priority. It's been clear. They have talked about it in the press that they do want to have this extended, and that's why they won't need Senate ratification. So that would be a very positive move, and I hope that they are able to do that.
So, Matthew, we know that President Putin and President-elect Biden have both said that they would agree to a 5-year extension of New START. That being the case, what are the sticking points here? Why hasn't it happened yet?
Well, I mean, it hasn't happened because the Trump administration was not, which is still in power, by the way, has not agreed, has not wanted an extension of New START without Russia agreeing specifically to a freeze on new nuclear warheads, a technical point, but a really important one. And in October, the Trump administration seemed to be wanting to overcome that obstacle. There were some negotiations that picked up speed. It looked that President Trump wanted to have another diplomatic win, if you will, in the lead up to the presidential election. And subsequently now we're in a situation of utter chaos in Washington, and the biggest political crisis you could argue since the U.S. Civil War, which is, by the way, going to grind, or is going to take up all of the Senate's attention probably as it takes up impeachment of second impeachment of President Trump coming up. So to make a long story short, the Trump administration never got the ball over the end line with Russia, and now we just have to wait and see how quickly the Biden administration can come up to speed.
Pavel, I want to take a step back and look once again at the components of the Open Skies Treaty, because you now have the two superpowers, the U.S. and Russia, that have pulled out. But the treaty does not cover military powers that have flourished since the end of the Cold War, like China, India, Pakistan. When you consider that, is the Open Skies Treaty even still relevant?
Well, yes, it has serious problems. It has problems of kind of overall political problems, because this was a treaty that was signed in the time of the euphoria after the end of the Cold War, when everyone believed that war in Europe is totally impossible, totally unthinkable, and let's be friends and let's fly all over each other and look out and everything's going to be just fine. Well, right now it's not fine at all. There's another, if not arms race happening, buildup of forces, and a possible war in Europe actually contemplated. And in this new environment, this agreement is rather politically outdated. It's also technically outdated. The basic plane for the open sky missions was the Soviet Antonov 30 spy plane, mass-produced in Soviet Union, and all Warsaw Pact countries had it, and all the former Soviet republics had it, and Western countries could even actually lease those planes together with pilots for such missions. Now these planes are almost all mothballed. The Americans used certified two Boeing planes that were 30 years old when the treaty was signed. Now they're 60 years old. They have to be replaced. And if America would have stayed in the treaty, they'd have to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to produce and certify spy planes that are actually of no good for real purposes, because the data they produce is not what the American satellites. They get a resolution of 50 times better than the planes under the open sky. So it's become rather irrelevant. And that's why the United States and Congress didn't want to give that money. So the United States were actually more or less forced to go. And without that, Russia is not interested. And the only country right now of interest that's left in the will be left in the open skies is apparently Belarus. Okay, Poland and maybe Lithuania would want to fly over Belarus, but that's a bit too little for a big treaty, and NATO countries flying over each other doesn't make much sense also at all. So I'm afraid this treaty, as it is going to be rather doomed no matter what.
Teresa, I saw you nodding along to some of what Pavel was saying. Did you want to jump in?
Well, I was based in Moscow during this time when it was signed. So there was a great honeymoon period, the post-Cold War period with Russia. And as Pavel has pointed out, that period is, this is a relic from that period. And we have increased strains now with Russia, also because of Crimea and these other issues. So I am sad to see, as Pavel described as this relic of the past, and it's doomed for the future. But I think that continued diplomacy is required, and I just hope that the tenure of the conversation will change under the Biden administration, because under Trump administration there have been a great deal of tensions, especially in the transatlantic space.
Matthew, throughout the show today, we've been talking about the U.S. and Russia pulling out of the Open Skies Treaty. We've talked repeatedly about New START and whether or not it's going to be extended. From your vantage point, how much is all of this a blow to the system of international arms control?
Well, yeah, that is my concern. I mean, to a certain extent, as we've said, the Open Skies Treaty is outdated. And the New START Treaty, yes, it provides commitments by each side to restraining the growth of their nuclear arsenals. But, they can undertake those constraints anyway. Without the New START Treaty being extended. So what I worry about is, the Trump, as Teresa was saying, the Trump administration has decided to pull out of these treaties, also the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, almost as simply a jab at Moscow. So the action of breaking down cooperation and norms of cooperation, which are fragile and very difficult to develop. It takes years to develop a regime or a set of rules of cooperation on any issue like that. And simply to throw those regimes out the window because you're either angry at Russia for misbehavior from Washington's perspective, or because you think in isolation this agreement doesn't make sense, what that ends up doing is taking away some of the guardrails that keep a very difficult relationship between Washington and Moscow on the road when there's another sort of geopolitical crisis. The regimes need to be protected.
Teresa, we only have about a minute left. I just want to ask about how NATO is reacting to all of this and how much of a concern is there amongst also these other signatories to the Open Skies Treaty.
At this point, there hasn't been any statements from individual European countries, and it was expected that this would happen. But I think that with NATO, the recent interest in China, so I call it Chinusia, this combination of China-Russia threat, this is kind of becoming more prevalent. So the Europeans are tending to look at not just Russia, but also the combination of China and Russia together. This is something that has not really been seen before in this period. So I think there's a growing interest or concern about China-Russia cooperation and what that will mean for the future of NATO.
All right, we've run out of time, so we're going to have to leave the conversation there. Thanks so much to all our guests, Pavel Felgenhauer, Teresa Fallon, and Matthew Bryza. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.